Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 872 for the 22nd of June, 2025. And we just had Richard Saunders here, by the way, and we just had the longest night of the year. But typical me, I was asleep through most of it. Coming up on this week's show. Now, on last week's show, you may remember I did a report about pseudoscience, having a look. What is pseudoscience? What are its characteristics? What are some notable examples? And I came across in the last few days a report on pseudoscience from the Lakeland Ledger in Florida, dated from 2007. And this report was repeated widely in many newspapers at the time, and it's all about science and pseudoscience. So on today's episode, following up from last week, we're going to kick off with that report from all those years ago. Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics newsletter, written by Tim Mendham. Hello, Tim, and read by Adrienne Hill, and this includes Adrienne's report about the weather in Canada, dramatic weather in Canada. It's very interesting. Have a listen. Then to round off the show, we visit once again those TROVE Archives, and we look for references to James Randi in Australia, the documentary. And I was pleasantly surprised to see how many newspaper reports were around about the time of Randi's visit. It did get some coverage, and subsequently later in the year when the documentary was broadcast. And of course, this has been brought about by the fact that recently, as you know, we released the 45th anniversary edition of James Randi in Australia, and you can see that for yourself at tinyurl.com/Randi Australia. And I'm pleased to say that in August, Skeptics in the pub here in Sydney, the first Thursday in August, I think that's the 7th or whenever it is, we're having a special screening of James Randi in Australia, and it looks like the director of the movie, the guy who put it together at the behest of Dick Smith, Bob Connolly, very famous documentary director, will be there in person. Very much looking forward to that. Now, if you're a fan of the Squaring the Strange podcast, and aren't we all, this week, just yesterday, I think, yeah, they released a new episode, and this was an episode I taped with them a couple of weeks ago. So I'm a guest on Squaring the Strange, if you'd like to have a listen, which is great because only last week I was the guest host for Skeptoid, Brian Dunning's Skeptoid. And thank you for people who have been giving me kind comments about my appearance on Skeptoid. So no matter where you are, maybe you're a bit stressed out from work, well, that's understandable. Maybe the Skeptic Zone can offer you an hour or so of just a little bit of escapism. Put your mind on other things. But now it's time for me to run downstairs. Let me see. It's a bit cold today. It's a bit chilly. I mean, we did just have the longest night of the year, I think, in North America and other parts of the world. Summer has officially started, but here it's very wintry. How about some pumpkin soup and toast? While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Last week on the show, you might remember I did a segment, a little bit, about pseudoscience, pretend science, things that sound science-y, things that ride on the coattails of science for a free trip, things that fool the public, things that run and hide from the merest thought of a proper scientific investigation or test of their claims. And a quick look at one of the many, many, many dictionary references online, pseudo adjective, being apparently rather than actually as stated. Also sham or spurious. Examples of the word pseudo. Here at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, you have your heads of state, your foreign ministers, your titans of business, your intellectuals, pseudo and real, but also you have Sharon Stone, Angelina Jolie, and Richard Gere. It's something that's pretending to be something else. It's something that can be mistaken for something else. It's not the full deal, not the real deal, not the full quid, as we might say. And when I was younger, there was an Australian rock group called Pseudo Echo, I seem to remember, who had a hit with Funky Town. Now, I mention this because during my research lately, I came across an article about pseudoscience. Now, this isn't the Trove segment, but I think it's worth mentioning. It comes from the Lakeland Ledger, dated the 18th of February 2007, not terribly long ago. In fact, this was published only 1 year before the start of the Skeptic Zone. And a story by Randolph E. Schmidt from the Associated Press. Americans, and then in brackets, kind of, then smarter on science. San Francisco. People in the United States know more about basic science today than they did 2 decades ago. Good news that researchers say is tempered by an unsettling growth in the belief of pseudoscience, such as astrology and visits by extraterrestrial aliens. In 1988, only about 10% knew enough about science to understand reports in major newspapers, a figure that grew to 28% by 2005, according to Don D. Miller, a Michigan State University professor. He presented his findings Saturday at the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The improvement largely reflects the requirement that all college students have at least some science courses, Miller said. This way they can better keep up with new developments through the media. And haven't things vastly changed about new developments being brought to us via various media channels since 2007? A panel of researchers expressed concern that people are giving increasing credence to pseudoscience, such as the visits of space aliens, lucky numbers, and horoscopes. And we can wonder about some definitions here. Lucky numbers is more of a superstition, I think, rather than a pseudoscience, although numerology is a pseudoscience. This is the so-called using mathematics and numbers to predict things or tell you about your character and so on. And like so many of these things, the star signs or tarot cards or the lines in the palms of your hand, your palm creases, flexation creases they're called, so you can open and close your hand. It's just a prop. As somebody once said, it's the same tune played on different instruments. And numerology is just another prop, but yes, that is definitely a pseudoscience. In addition, these researchers noted an increase in college students who reported they are unsure about creationism as compared with evolution. And of course, creationism is one of the classic examples of pseudoscience. More recent generations know more factual material about science, said Carol Susan Losh, or Losh, L-O-S-H, an associate professor at Florida State University. But she said when it comes to pseudoscience, quote, the news is not good, end quote. One problem, she says, is that pseudoscience can speak to the meaning of life in ways that science does not. For example, for many women, having a good life still depends on whom they marry, she said. Quote, but what does astrology speak to? Love relationships, end quote. Losh said, noting that belief in horoscopes is much higher among women than men. And that is the case we have found for many decades, that certain things like astrology, palm reading, tarot cards, that sort of thing, some of the classics, are far more frequented by women. Women seek these services in greater percentage and a greater number than men. And that's a discussion for another day, why that is the case, I imagine. The disclosure that former First Lady Nancy Reagan consulted an astrologer resulted in widespread derision in the media. But few younger people remember that episode today, she said. Miller said that most readers of horoscopes are women, contributing to the listing of, quote, female, end quote, as a leading negative factor in science literacy. Women also tend to take fewer college courses, she said. Belief in abduction by space aliens is also on the rise, Loesch said. Quote, it's not surprising that the generation that grew up on Twilight Zone and early Star Trek television endorsed a link between UFOs and alien spacecraft, she said. Do you hear much about alien abductions anymore? Where's that gone? That used to be quite a thing. Not that many decades ago, maybe 2 decades ago. Am I getting this right? Maybe within the last 20 years, tapering off a little bit. You really don't hear much about that anymore. Maybe the aliens have had enough. They've kidnapped enough people and cows. They're satisfied. Maybe they have more interesting planets to visit. Pseudoscience discussion is often absent from the classroom, Loesch said. So, quote, we have basically left it up to the media, end quote. Yes, I think a course or a day or two in high school science about the nature of pseudoscience and some of its prominent examples would be time well spent. We read on. Raymond Eve of the University of Texas at Arlington had mixed news in surveys of students at an unnamed Midwestern university. The share that believed aliens had visited Earth fell from 25% in 1983 to 15% in 2006. There was also a decline in belief in Bigfoot and in whether psychics can predict the future. Well, that's encouraging. But there also has been a drop in the number of people who believe evolution correctly explains the development of life on Earth, and an increase in those who believe mankind was created about 10,000 years ago. Oh dear. Miller said a second major negative factor to scientific literacy was religious fundamentalism and aging. Having taken college science courses was a strong positive influence, followed by overall education and information science learning through the media. Having children at home also resulted in adults becoming more scientifically informed, Miller said. Nick Orlam of the University of Surrey in England suggested that belief in astrology might be a simple misunderstanding of the question, with people confusing astrology with astronomy. And that does sometimes happen. I've come across examples of that where people simply confuse the two, or they simply don't know enough about astronomy and exactly what it is. It's surprising how many people don't know that the stars that we see at night time are at vastly different distances from each other, from our perspective. Anyway, in one European study, about 25% of people said they thought astrology was very scientific. But when the question was rephrased to horoscopes, that fell to about 7%. And that's a good example of the confusion. That's a better way to put the question. Talk about horoscopes more than astrology, in case there is that confusion. And of course, nobody knows more about horoscopes than our very own Psychic Penny. I wonder what she's doing these days. How about this, Psychic Penny? How about you set up your very own College of Pseudoscience? Psychic Penny's College of Pseudoscientific Wonders. Psychic Penny's College of Pseudoscientific Sciences. No, I'm sure we can think of something. And the reference here is on the net. It says American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is www.aaas.org. And I just thought of another pseudoscience, graphology, the study of handwriting to determine one's character, etc. And again, like many of these things, graphology is simply another instrument upon which you play the same tune, which is mostly cold reading and Barnum statements. You have a big loop here when you make the letter P. That means that sometimes you like to be the life of the parties, but you're a bit of an extrovert, but not all the time. You know, there's sometimes where you need to be quiet and have some peace. Oh, here's a line in your palm. It runs from your little finger. Oh, that means that sometimes you like to be, very out there, like the life of the party. But, other times you need your peace and quiet. Oh, you were born on this date. The sign of Taurus. Well, a typical Taurian likes to be the life of the party. Wow, sometimes you can make a fool of yourself. But, there are times when you need that solitude. Let me look here. And it's, the Ace of Wands in this tarot deck has come up for you. Oh, well, typically, you can be out there sometimes. You'd like to entertain. You don't mind that, but there are times. I think you understand what I'm getting at. Well, there you are. A little reference there in historical newspapers to pseudoscience. And that's why I love poring through newspapers and magazines from the past to see what research, to see what thinking was in the decades that have gone and how things have changed, and in some cases, how things have not changed.
Dr. Harriet Hall, MD, known to thousands as the Skepdoc, was a retired family physician and former Air Force flight surgeon who wrote about medicine, so-called complementary and alternative medicine, science, quackery, and critical thinking. Harriet produced a free online course of 10 video lectures on science-based medicine and alternative medicine. The videos and an accompanying course guide can be found by following the link at skepdoc.info or by visiting tinyurl.com/skepdoc series. Topics covered in the series are science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine, what is CAM, chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathy and herbal medicine, energy medicine, miscellaneous alternatives, pitfalls in research, and science-based medicine in the media and politics. Harriet covers each topic in a matter-of-fact, no-nonsense way that is sure to educate and entertain. Find it at tinyurl.com/skepdoc series. Everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, and I'm going to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics newsletter. This is newsletter number 224. Don't forget, you can sign up to this newsletter at skeptics.com.au and get the full report, complete with all the links, every other week, right into your inbox. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. In 1980, Dick Smith invited James Randi to Australia to carry out some tests of water diviners. This event proved pivotal to the foundation of Australian Skeptics, as after it, Dick suggested that someone should set up an organization to do this sort of testing in Australia. Australian Skeptics was formed in response to that call, and the rest is history. What was also history was the documentary that was made of those tests. Shown on TV a couple of times, the film itself was lost. The only surviving version was a VHS recording of the program that the late Barry Williams had fortuitously kept. 20 years after the original tests, Richard Saunders digitized that recording. But the quality of the visuals and audio was not great. It was watchable, but far from ideal. Until now. Using AI software, Skeptic Zone listener Glenn Brady and Richard Saunders have overseen the restored film to its former glory. Possibly even better. The results can be seen in the 45th anniversary edition of James Randi in Australia, an historic document of an important point in the history of the skeptical movement in Australia, and well worth a watch in its own right. In the meantime, read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I will do just that. RFK Jr. fires CDC expert panel on vaccines to restore trust. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s decision to retire the previous 17-member U.S. Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices was widely decried by doctors' groups and public health organizations, who feared the advisors would be replaced by a group aligned with Kennedy's desire to reassess and possibly end long-standing vaccination recommendations. And that has proved to be the case. Among the new committee members are Vicki Pepworth, a director of the National Vaccine Information Center, a group that is widely considered to be a leading source of vaccine misinformation, and Dr. Robert Malone, an anti-vaccine activist who suggested this year without evidence that recent pediatric deaths from measles were due to medical error and that COVID vaccines caused a form of AIDS. Meanwhile, RFK Jr. is reviewing safety data in an effort to revisit debunked claims that vaccines may cause autism. Orthopedic surgeon Dr. David Geyer, a well-known anti-vaccine activist, has been appointed to, quote, uncover proof that health officials hid data linking vaccines to autism, end quote, according to the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, more older Americans are embracing new vaccines, according to the New York Times. Those who are more likely to feel the effect of viruses, especially respiratory viruses, are also more likely to take up vaccines that can prevent much of the serious illnesses they face. Are mediums and channelers ready for professionalization? A study from a couple of years ago is being cited as supporting the professionalization of mediumship, such as the development of ethical standards. I guess that would mean they'd have to stop being mediums? The fact that one of the authors of that study is the director of research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, a group that promotes paranormal beliefs, is evident in the comment that, quote, lab testing on mediums, which has been taking place since 2003, has become refined over time and there is an established methodology. Passing such a test would lead great credibility to mediums who can accomplish it, end quote. I wonder what their protocols are. Balancing trust in evidence with healthy skepticism. How do you reach a healthy balance between trust and skepticism? How can researchers increase the transparency of their work to make it possible to evaluate how much confidence the public should have in any particular study? The concept of reproducibility may offer important answers to these questions. Find your own conspiracy theory. Ready for a fun, engaging, and slightly mind-bending journey down the rabbit hole? Introducing A Conspiracy Theory for Everybody, a series of leading and often humorous questions to pinpoint the conspiracy theory that uncannily resonates with your worldview. So I checked that out, and apparently my conspiracy theory is that The Simpsons predicts the future. It says, forget Nostradamus and his vague quatrains. The real prophets are the animators and writers of The Simpsons. And it gives me a really long blurb. It's quite fun. And it said, Skeptics, those buzzkills, point to the law of large numbers. With over 700 episodes and counting, some coincidences are statistically bound to happen, especially when viewed through the rose-tinted glasses of confirmation bias. It's kind of fun. Check it out. New Zealand Skeptics Convention, November 2025. The Committee of the New Zealand Skeptics are in the early throes of planning their 2025 convention. It will be held in Christchurch at the end of November. Dates to be confirmed, but likely the 28th through 30th. Global Skeptics in the Pub. Following on last year's event, the International Global Skeptics in the Pub will begin at 7 p.m. local time in New Zealand on Friday, the 22nd of August, and will go around the world and end at 9 p.m. local time in Hawaii, 24 hours later on the same calendar day. This event will take place via Zoom. Items of interest. Travel tips. UK's most haunted hotel. Another one. This story is a teaser for a series, My Haunted Hotel, on Prime. But we think the spookiest thing is the owner having surveillance cameras in every room, including the bedrooms. Ooh. A filmmaker has discovered the location of the Holy Grail. Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Francis Bacon, tunnels in Hertford. The trailer for this film is truly horrendous and says nothing. Worth a giggle, but nothing else. The UK's paranormal triangle. Oh, there's so many triangles. Bermuda, Japan, Alaska, and now the UK. Everyone has to have a triangle, which is probably better than being a square. Apparently, this one in East Yorkshire has, quote, UFOs, big cats, and baffling disappearances, end quote. Silliest photo of the week. It's a ghost dog, or a stump, or a coat, or nothing really. This is pareidolia run rampant. A man captures an eerie picture of ghost dog in historic Gloucester building. Quote, the most haunted building in the UK, end quote. And aren't they all? Silliest story of the week. He's back. Uri Geller stops Greta Thunberg yacht. Uri goes political. He says he used his psychic powers to break the navigation tools on Greta Thunberg's Gaza flotilla ship, the Madeleine, and warned that he would stop her if she comes to harm Israel. All right, Skeptic Zone listeners, it's time to wrap up another newsletter. But before we go, let's talk about something that might just blow you away. Did you know that Alberta is no stranger to severe thunderstorms and tornadoes? Just yesterday, I had to postpone recording the newsletter due to a storm that lasted several hours. But I did record the storm. Our rooftop weather station reported 1,016 lightning strikes within a 40-kilometer radius, with the closest just 2 kilometers away. Forecasters warned of supercells forming across the province, bringing the potential for large hail, damaging winds, and the possibility of tornadoes. How often does Alberta have to worry about tornadoes? Well, according to the Northern Tornadoes Project, or NTP, founded at Western University in 2017, the number varies from 3 in 2018 to 23 in 2019. Alberta has recorded 3 tornadoes to date this year, including 2 EF0 and 1 EF1. The EF, or Enhanced Fujita Scale, rates tornado intensity based on damage and wind speed, ranging from light damage, which is an EF0, to incredible damage, or EF5. In 2023, Alberta recorded 19 tornadoes, with one particularly severe EF4 tornado that hit Didsbury, which is just 70 kilometers north of where I live. On Canada Day, July 1st, with wind speeds of 275 kilometers per hour. Thanks to our emergency alert system, only one minor injury occurred despite significant property damage. Unfortunately, livestock were killed. This was the worst tornado that Alberta saw since Black Friday on July 31st, 1987, when an F4 tornado with winds of 418 kilometers per hour hit eastern Edmonton and Sherwood Park, killing 27 people and injuring around 300. Happily, no storms are in the forecast for the next few days, so studio and dog walking time will not be compromised. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada.
My guest this week is a wonderful example of a person at the very top of their game who put up with some very substandard behaviour, blew off the red flags being waved right in front of her face, had a major topple over and found herself wondering, what was that game and why was I playing it? If you're sitting at your desk today going, I'm a mess, I can't keep doing this, then tune in to the Why Smart Women podcast. I think you'll find it very illuminating. See you soon. Bye.
Once again, it's time to go back to the archives, the digital newspaper and so on archives. Oh yes, at your fingertips and at my fingertips at TROVE, at trove.nla.gov.au, with thousands upon thousands of pages of digitised newspapers and magazines and so on. And with the recent release of the special 45th anniversary edition of James Randi in Australia, I did a search. Well, I searched my own archives and then I did a further search to see if and how and to what extent this event made the news, the newspapers, all the way back there in July 1980. And I was pleased to say yes, to an extent it certainly did make the news. And indeed, I have found a reference to the event before it began. On the 24th of July 1980, and the tests were held on the 29th, we have something here from the Sydney Morning Herald, and this is really focusing on one of the contestants, or one of the diviners, a man by the name of Vic Vasey. And there's a photograph here in the report of Vic in action with these divining. It's a long bit of curved metal, and curved into a sort of a U shape. And the caption is The Water Diviner. And this is a story by Richard Macy. Vic sets out to prove a point and gain $30,000. Vic Vasey, a 66-year-old retired Doonside boxer, has no doubts that he will be a lot richer next week. Mr. Vasey, a water diviner for the past 53 years, is one of 40 people who have accepted the $30,000 challenge to demonstrate one of a number of paranormal events under scientific conditions. The challenge, to be held on Tuesday at North Ryde, has been organised by the Sydney businessman Mr. Dick Smith, the American magician Mr. James Randi, and the writer Mr. Philip Adams.
It should be easy money. I don't think they're making it hard.
Mr. Vasey said yesterday as he spoke about the challenge.
Both my mother and my father were terrific water diviners, and so was my grandfather.
He explained.
It must be hereditary. I haven't a clue about how it works, but maybe it has something to do with running water giving off a current of electricity.
Mr. Vasey said all he had to do to find running water was to walk along holding a forked stick or a piece of wire and wait for it to bend downwards.
Metal is better because the sticks break under the force.
And here's one, actually predates the last one. This is in the Sydney Morning Herald once again. This is published on the 28th of June, 1980. A story by Ben Sandulans, and there's a picture here of Randi, one of the classic portraits of him, looking very stern. James Randi, are the psychics scared of a magician? $30,000 promise for levitation, divination. Psychic challenge. And at the top of the report here's a section in bold, a little hard to read because the copy I have, the reproduction, is a little bit grainy, fuzzy. James Randi has suggested 11 feats which would win the first person to demonstrate them the prize money for psychic powers. They are levitation, yourself or move some remote object, deform or break a remote object, divine the contents of a sealed envelope, predict an event of sufficient oddity, detect an aura, diagnose illness remotely, cure an illness by paranormal interventions, divine the presence or nature of a concealed substance, control the actions of a person or a machine, demonstrate out-of-body travel or perception, and perform any other demonstration of paranormal powers without resorting to trickery or technology. Seems fair enough. Dick Smith, Philip Adams and James Randi, an American magician, will offer next month $30,000 cash to the first person who demonstrates a paranormal ability.
They can levitate, bend spoons or divine for water by any means other than trickery or technology,
Mr. Smith said yesterday. The money is being put up for proof of any psychic or paranormal powers. But instead of rushing to put their powers to the test, Australian levitators, water diviners, spoon benders and psychic surgeons are discovering prior commitments which prevent them from using their gifts to win the prize. Mr. Smith, Sydney's unconventional electronics businessman, believes this shyness has something to do with Mr. Randi, who will arrive in Sydney on July 28 to perform in Sydney and Melbourne.
He can bend spoons, perform psychic surgery and create all manner of illusions because he's a master magician, but he detests people who claim to be supernatural or psychic when they are only magicians.
Mr. Smith and Mr. Adams have both matched James Randi's long-standing reward of $10,000, or so it seems. Mr. Adams said yesterday he had set aside
$10,000 in psychic money, which would be deposited by thought transference in the account of the successful claimant.
A paddock has already been prepared for a test of dowsing or the power of water divining with a forked stick or other object. Pipes made of various materials have been buried in the paddock. The dowsers will be invited to divine which pipes contain flowing water. The team had hoped to find some entrants at the Caulfield Institute of Technology in Melbourne, where researcher Dr. Charles Osborne claims to have discovered inexplicable psychic powers among children and students. But to their disappointment, Dr. Osborne confirmed yesterday that he had been unable to interest any of his 40 subjects in accepting a test of their powers, which include moving toy boats around ponds by thought power. Mr. Smith said Dr. Osborne's astonishing claims had received
uncritical coverage in the press, but not even $30,000 could induce one of them to prove their paranormal gifts.
He said he had long believed that the public was being
intellectually ripped off
by UFO reports, pyramidology, astrology, and humbug in general. but he is now prepared to put his money where his mouth was.
I'm not closing my mind to the possibility that people possess such powers, but when the claims are dignified by a member of a publicly funded institute of higher learning, I think we are all entitled to say, "Show me,"
Mr. Smith said. And now we have one of the first reports post the testing. So this is published in the Sydney Morning Herald again on the 30th of July 1980. And there are some pictures here of the diviners in action. Snapshots or press shots, I should say, taken during the day. Doubters' Dollars Safe from Diviners by Richard Macy. Skeptics had a field day yesterday at North Sydney when 10 people accepted a $40,000 challenge to demonstrate their ability to divine for water, brass and gold. No one won the money. The Sydney businessman, Mr. Dick Smith, the writer Philip Adams, an American magician, Mr. James Randi, and the journalist Richard Carlton were each offering $10,000 to anyone who could repeatedly demonstrate their ability to detect running water under the ground or pick a box containing a lump of brass or gold. The diviners looking for running water were each given 10 opportunities to walk over a course under which 10 pipes were buried. After each try, the water was secretly channeled into a different pipe, and the diviners had to select which pipe was carrying the water. A short distance away, other diviners were attempting to pick which of 10 cardboard boxes had a lump of brass inside. Again, each diviner was given 10 chances to find the right box. The remaining 9 boxes were either empty or full of pieces of rock. But no matter how hard they tried with their fork sticks, metal bars, pieces of wire, or keys dangling from a string, no one managed to prove they could find what they were looking for. Even the replacement of the brass with an $18,000 gold ingot failed to give enough incentive to make the divining rods work properly. The afternoon broke into chaos when one of the diviners, Mr. Vic Vasey of Doonside, lost a small piece of brass he was using to tune his rod. Mr. Smith immediately called out the waiting brass diviners to begin searching the long grass for Mr. Vasey's piece of metal, but it was not found. After the diviners had completed 107 tests, Mr. Smith announced that the success rate had averaged a mere 11%.
"No better than the chance you would get from throwing a dice,"
he said. And we have another report here from the Canberra Times, dated the 30th of July 1980. So this is the day after the test. Diviners miss $40,000. Sydney. No one won a $40,000 challenge to diviners to demonstrate their ability to divine for water, brass and gold in Sydney yesterday. None of the 10 acceptors could even find a lost brass tuning prong used on one of their divining rods. Sydney businessman Mr. Dick Smith, writer Philip Adams, American magician James Randi and journalist Richard Carlton had each offered $10,000 to anyone who could repeatedly demonstrate their ability to detect running underground water or pick which box contained a lump of brass or gold. Judges were the Reverend Ted Knopfs, director of the Wayside Chapel, Father Laurie Drake, senior lecturer in geophysics at Macquarie University, Mr. Bill Williamson of the New South Wales Water Resources Commission, and Mr. John Mills, Executive Secretary of the National Water Wells Association. The diviners looking for running water were each given 10 opportunities to walk over a course under which 10 pipes were buried. After each try, the water was channeled into a different pipe and the diviners had to select which pipe was carrying the water. Others tried to pick which of 10 cardboard boxes had a lump of brass inside. Again, each diviner was given 10 chances to find the correct box. But no matter how hard they tried with their fork sticks, metal bars, pieces of wire or keys dangling from a string, no one proved they could find what they were looking for. After the diviners had completed 107 tests, Mr. Smith said the success rate had only averaged 11%.
No better than the chance you would get from throwing a dice.
So a similar report to the previous one. We have another one here sometime later. This is from the 9th of November 1980 in the Sydney Morning Herald. It's called When Seeing Isn't Believing. Another picture of James Randi with the caption here, James Randi, he can't cop ESP. And this talks about the tests, and it talks about the documentary. And the report goes, Don Lane and believers in divining rod, spoon bending and psychic surgery should watch the special James Randi in Australia.
Paranormal nonsense, claptrap and flummery,
says Mr. James Randi, as he convincingly demonstrates how easily people can fool the more gullible among us and themselves. Mr. Lane should watch Channel 7 at 7:30 on Wednesday night to hear the cogent arguments he would not allow Mr. Randi to expound on his show. Devotees of the Lane program will recall the evening the compere had the ill grace to swear at his guest and storm off the set after Randi had raised doubts about Doris Stokes, whom he calls
the granny who hears dead people talking to her.
In a statement issued through his Australian sponsor, Dick Smith, the scientist says he's certain Lane's actions were a calculated setup. Slight misreporting there. Randi never claimed to be a scientist, but he certainly conducted tests using the scientific method. Randi says he doesn't believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy for the same reason he can't cop ESP, spoon bending, and the rest. Insufficient evidence. His evidence, in this doubting Thomas view, places all things paranormal firmly in the Easter Bunny class. It would be a pity if he lost most of his viewers in the first few minutes, as he appears to remove a quantity of blood and guts from a willing victim's stomach. It isn't psychic surgery, but sleight of hand. And I'll break here and say, that's interesting. I wonder if this reporter saw a preview of the documentary where it was a slightly different edit, because the psychic surgery appears right at the end of the documentary. Nevertheless, by a similar trick, he bends spoons in the slickest, faster than the eye, Uri Geller fashion. The clincher takes place in a field in Ryde, where the reputations of a group of water diviners are left looking a little tattered. Attracted by an offer of $40,000, $10,000 each from Skeptics Randi, Smith, Philip Adams and Richard Carlton, the dowsers had to identify gold and brass hidden in cardboard boxes, and which out of 10 pipes had water flowing through it. Before the experiment, most said they would be 100% successful. 5 agreed to split the proceeds, they were so confident. In this case, seeing is disbelieving. The results are no better than chance or guesswork, and Randi declares,
it would seem to indicate that dowsing as a force does not exist.
Does this shake the faith of our dowsers? Not a bit. They come up with every excuse under the sun, including sunspots, to explain away this rare lapse.
People,
Randi concludes sadly,
simply will not learn a lesson.
And that's a story by Don Groves. Now, here I have the television program guide for November the 12th, 1980, a Wednesday. Australian Television Network 7, simply known as Channel 7. 7:30, special, James Randi in Australia, spelled R-A-N-D-Y. One of America's foremost magicians, James Randi, has been brought to Australia in an attempt to prove or disprove the validity of water diviners and psychic surgeon. He conducts some experiments with water diviners to test their validity, and a reward of $30,000 is offered to any person who can scientifically prove that they have supernatural powers. Now, it could very well be that that is the very time, that broadcast was the very time that the only copy known to exist was recorded onto a videotape. But the show was repeated 2 or 3 more times in the next couple of years. And finally, we have a different angle, different point of view. And this is by Mark Lawrence, writing in the Age newspaper on the 13th of November, 1980. So, the day after the documentary was broadcast. Magician tests divining claim. James Randi, one of the world's most skilled magicians, is a formidable foe for those tricksters who fake psychic phenomena or paranormal feats. In James Randi in Australia, Channel 7, the master of sleight of hand performs a few of his own feats, including some psychic surgery. But most of the program records the preparations for and the running of a scientific test on the claim by diviners that they are able to locate underground water and metal. The results are a devastating blow to their credibility and triumph for the skeptical Mr. Randi. The program was made during a recent tour by Mr. Randi, the highlight of which was his confrontation with Don Lane on Channel 9. During his tour, Mr. Randi and 3 other men each offered $10,000 to anyone who could perform a paranormal feat which stood up to scientific scrutiny. The checks were never claimed. The program is mildly entertaining, but takes too much time to say a little. Well, it's only 44 minutes. I am not an apologist for blind belief in people who claim extraordinary powers, and there is a great deal of common sense in what Mr. Randi has to say. But he does make some wild statements. Example, if paranormal powers could be proved, then the laws of science would be down the drain. Why? Why would proof of the existence of normally latent psychic capacities within man rob the laws of science of their validity? Another example. Psychic feats, is claptrap and flummery from beginning to end. Is it? There are many scientists whose own tests have encouraged them to place great credence in theories about psychic phenomena. As an aside, as I've mentioned many times, this was decades and decades ago. You would think that we would know by now. We would know. The program is also deficient in its narrow scope. Randi is completely locked into a concept of a mechanistic universe, a machine, including mankind, which can be analysed and broken down into formulae and laws of science. No attempt is made to even comment on the possibility that if there is a psychic, spiritual, supernatural realm, it may just be that its operation cannot be broken down by test tube, mortar and pestle. The program is produced by Dick Smith, one of the gentlemen prepared to part with $10,000, and is made by Dick Smith Adventure Proprietary Limited. It is a shame that the effervescent Mr. Smith could not have made this a slightly more professional effort by leaving a few more feet of himself giggling on the editing room floor. That is a story by Mark Lawrence. And the accompanying photograph here has James Randi probably taken maybe a good 10 years before, maybe in the early 70s, judging by how he looks. James Randi, an assistant, showmanship to deceive the eye, and he appears to be levitating a volunteer or an assistant. Well, there we are. That's quite a few, a good percentage of the press clippings I could discover I found about the testing and the documentary. So if you haven't seen the documentary, you might have a better understanding. Or if you have seen it, you can rewatch it with a better understanding. And in the next 3 weeks or so, we have more adventures and the life and times of James the Amazing Randi for the Trove segment, including a listing I found dating back to 1956. But you too can find out all about water diviners or James Randi or adventures or Bigfoots or Yowies or anything. My goodness me, when you go to Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, type in your search, because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Thank you to those people who continue to support the show in a very real sense with PayPal or Patreon contributions. And sometimes people put a little extra the Skeptic Zone's way by, what shall we say, an extra contribution. Now, Cub reporter Maynard has sent me a link to a very strange site indeed. Forest of the Fallen, first planted in 2021. This is it appears to be an anti-vaccination conspiracy site, and just goes to show that these people are still out there proclaiming that thousands of people have been killed, probably, where are we, from vaccinations and false flag COVID stuff. And in fact, their own website says here about them, our mission, Forest of the Fallen, is a silent display. So it's lots of little posters on sticks. It is solely a platform where we share only CV-19 injection deaths and injuries. The forest displays the public domain stories of CV-19 and then in quotation marks vaccinated people. And then it says, as they were all vaccinated, it is literally actually a completely vaccinated display and should never be referred to as an anti-vax display. But that's what it is, of course. Thank you, Maynard. It just goes to show that these cranks are still out there. Coming up on the next episode of the Skeptic Zone, I meant to catch up with Susan Gobick this week, but didn't quite get there. Susan, I might be giving you a call soon. And also, in Trove, we continue, as today's Trove concerned James Randi, we continue a series on James the Amazing Randi from decades in the past. And I see next week our news item comes from 1974. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from a chilly Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to the die-hard people who stay for the after party, the dice game, the Easter egg in the middle of winter. This is where I roll a 10-sided die. I roll it 4 times. And let me just get my pad and paper here. I'm going to write the results. Let's see now. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to predict the numbers ahead of time. So, in roll 1, I'm going to predict a 10. Yes, in roll 2, I'll predict a 2. Roll 3, a 5 for Susan Gobick. And roll 4, a 4. Let's go. Roll 1. Well, off to a flying start. 10. Great. Okay. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Roll 2. 3. Ooh. Well, I predicted 2, and it was a 3, so close. Roll 5. Here we go. Roll 3, I should say. I predicted a 5. Oh, it's a 7. Okay, not so good. And last roll, I predicted a 4. And what do we have here? A 1. Oh, well, you know, today's winning numbers are 10, 3, 7 and 1. And at least I got the first one right.